Joining us, MS Now's Ines de la Cuetara reporting from Jerusalem. MS Now's Josh Einiger reporting from Dubai. MS Now's Vaughn Hilliard covers the White House. And Ron Insana is veteran financial journalist and publisher of The Message of the Markets on Substack. Ron, I want to start there. That warning from Qatar's energy minister that this conflict could bring down the economies of the world. It's chilling. This situation we're in right now with oil and gas, how bad could it get?
Well, the United States is a little different than the rest of the world, Chris, since it is energy self-sufficient. And so producing 13.7 million barrels a day of oil and being the largest natural gas producer in the world, we're a little less sensitive to it. Europe, China, Japan all rely on imports, heavy imports of either liquefied natural gas or oil. Japan imports 90% of its oil from the rest of the world, as does China, although China is sitting on a relatively large reserve. Having said that, this could have shockwaves around the globe if it were to continue for a meaningful period of time. As Qatar said, if they have to shut in all productions, declare so-called force majeure, an act of God, to shut down production, that would rob much of the rest of the world of those supplies of oils that are trapped either in the Strait of Hormuz or being shut down because they can't ship oil and they're running out of storage capacity. Here in the U.S., we're approaching $90 a barrel for oil. That's going to push gasoline prices up at a time when the Federal Reserve is uncomfortable with the current rate of inflation. And as you just pointed out, we saw job losses last month of 92,000 since Liberation Day last April, when the tariffs were first announced by the president. We've had no net new job creation in the United States. So basically, it's mini stagflation here at home, and it could be even more problematic for the rest of the world.
Yeah, 92,000 jobs were expected to be were lost. They expected 50,000 to be added. What is going on with jobs?
Well, 31,000 of those losses had to do with a nurses' strike that took place in certain parts of the country. But even still, it was a far weaker number than had been anticipated. Over the last 6 months, the average job losses in the U.S. economy have been about 1,000. So the labor market is frozen. We've seen the labor market participation rate also decline and wipe out 4 years of gains. So we're seeing a rather unhealthy labor market at a time when, again, inflation is above the Fed's target, kind of boxes the Federal Reserve in. It doesn't give them a lot of latitude to cut interest rates as long as oil prices remain elevated. That will feed through to inflation readings over the next several months. So to improperly paraphrase Charles Dickens, this is the worst of times, and this is the worst of times.
Oh, boy. Vaughn, there were already reports of nervousness in the West Wing over gas prices. Now we have this weak jobs report. Is there any indication behind the scenes that the White House is working on a shift in strategy?
Well, they're at the whims of the president of the United States, who, by all accounts, you're looking at a global economy that has strong impact on what happens here domestically. And what you're seeing with gas prices is reflective of the way in which the policies and the actions of the executive branch of this government are accelerating the ultimate outcomes and the changes to the global economy in really rapid, transformative ways here. And so it was more than a year ago, I think, when we talk about Donald Trump and the economy and those behind-the-scenes conversations that are taking place, right? That is a conversation we had a year ago, Chris, when the president there in his first joint address to Congress suggested that Americans should expect to face some disturbances in the economy as he was implementing those sweeping tariffs. And yet, more than a year later, there are only further economic questions here at the hands of policies of this administration, one in which key trading partners still do not know exactly the terms of their tariff rates in their trading negotiations with this White House, the extent to which the president is going to be effectively able to maintain control over the oil supply in Venezuela, exactly what what does the oil supply out of the Middle East and the Gulf countries look like, but then also the president here literally today suggesting that Cuba is next here. So there are so many variables in ways that the president has tried to effectuate change at the economy domestically by trying to pressure the Federal Reserve, for example, to lower lower interest rates. But in so many ways, what you are seeing, to Ron's point here, is an economy that is very much operating in real time in the stock market and beyond on the policies that are coming out of the White House, policies that, quite frankly, can change hour to hour at this point in time. So in terms of strategy, it's very much at the whim of Donald Trump here in real time.
So, Josh, the State Department now says 24,000 American citizens have safely returned to the U.S. from the Middle East since the war began. And as we saw at the beginning, we're seeing flights touch down here. But what more are we hearing from those Americans?
Well, Chris, there's still Iranian hardware flying through the air all through the Persian Gulf and the Middle East. 9 missiles and more than 100 drones just here in the UAE just today. But still, most of these countries have managed to reopen their airspace to get things moving again. Emirates, the massive airline that's made Dubai's airport the busiest international connection point on the planet, says it's going to be up to about 60% of its network tomorrow. And people are getting home now. There are around, as you say, 24,000 Americans, according to the State Department, who have made it home on their own, generally. They say about half that number have called a hotline to get guidance and assistance, but they've all generally gotten on flights to get back to terra firma, back home.
They send an alert on your phone saying missiles, like, hide, like, be away from windows and things like that. So it's kind of scary because we've never experienced something like that.
To try to book a taxi from Israel to the Jordan border while there's literally a bomb that happened like 30 minutes prior to that, and you just kind of have to hope that you don't get hit on the way there. State Department not very helpful at all. Every alert that they gave and all advice that they gave was like a day at least too late.
The first person you saw there was on that first Emirates flight from Dubai to New York that arrived yesterday. We were on the return flight on that very plane back here to Dubai. When we flew, there were only 60 people on a plane built for 500. Not that many people trying to come to the region. The difference, though, is El Al. The Israeli airline isn't flying anyone out of Israel just yet, but they are flying planes empty to go pick up stranded Israelis who are all around the world. There was actually one of those recovery flights, Chris, at JFK when we boarded our flight yesterday. It was jam-packed. Home may be a war zone, but it is still home. Chris?
So, Ines, what do we know about this intense new round of strikes that our Americans are working to escape?
Yeah, Chris, so I'll tell you here in Israel, so here in Jerusalem, we have been getting fewer sirens going off. So it appears like the frequency of attacks on Jerusalem is lessening, but sirens very much continuing to sound in Tel Aviv, and Israel very much continuing to pound Iran and now Hezbollah in Lebanon. That is very much a second front that's opening up in this war. Israel going after, obviously, the Iranian proxy Hezbollah in both Beirut and southern Lebanon, and issuing evacuation orders for citizens there. In terms of the situation in Iran, we're not getting a whole lot of information because the blackout continues there. So it's hard to know just what's going on the ground. Today marks 6 days since the beginning of that communications blackout. Lots of questions as to who's going to lead Iran next. The president says that he wants to be involved in picking the next leader of Iran. But both President Trump and the Israelis are calling for the people of Iran to seize this opportunity. It's unclear, though, just how mobilized the opposition to the regime is. Now, we did speak earlier today to a spokesperson for one group that's trying to mobilize, the National Council for the Resistance of Iran. They tell us there are resistance units inside of Iran that are starting to mobilize, that are targeting what they call centers of suppression. So things like IRGC command centers that they say they've been setting on fire. Unclear how much support that group has, though. There are likely lots of different groups inside Iran that are, potentially preparing to mobilize, but it's also unclear how much support the regime still has. And meanwhile, concerns now that this conflict could escalate, that other countries could be dragged into this conflict. We know that both the French and the British have sent additional assets to the region. So the French sending a nuclear aircraft carrier as well as jets. The Brits also sending jets and allowing the U.S. to use their base on Cyprus for their operations. So that base was targeted by Iranian drones. And today we also learned from the Australian Prime Minister that there were Australian nationals on board the U.S. submarine that torpedoed that Iranian warship. So that is raising concerns that Australians could potentially become a target, or that Australia could also get dragged into this.
So, Ron, the shipping giant Maersk has temporarily suspended 2 key shipping services, of course, due to the war. It was a big headline on CNBC. There you see it on our air. But explain why the average American should care about that.
Well, it's not just oil and gas that goes through the Strait of Hormuz, Chris. There's fertilizer, there are foodstuffs, there are petrochemicals, there are plastics. There are a whole host of things in addition to oil and liquefied natural gas that go through. And so there could be disruptions to food supplies in other parts of the world or here at home to the extent that we rely on fertilizer coming from that part of the world. And Maersk is one of the biggest shipping operations in the world. And so there's a lot of cargo that gets trapped, and that does have an impact on economic activity that could weaken, as the Qataris said, economies around the world. And we now have oil crossing $90 a barrel. It was at just under $56 on January 7th. So it's up $34 in the space of 2 months. And that, again, as you see, with gas at $3.32, that's likely to go higher. So all of this taken in combination are net negatives for a U.S. economy that's got a labor market that's also struggling, and a Federal Reserve, as I mentioned earlier, that's kind of boxed in and doesn't exactly know what to do at this juncture with interest rates.